on the One Network.
Before we get very far into our next story, we do have a warning for you tonight. What you're about to see and hear may not be suitable for children. Tonight, take a walk in their world.
Transpicuous news, connecting the dots between the lines. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Transpicuous News. Sorry for the delay in episode 3 coming out. Life, the universe, and everything seemed to interfere for the last little while, but we're back and we are making a very big effort to get back onto a weekly schedule, which will make everyone happy, I know. So, as we haven't done any real reporting for the last month, I'm going to run through some of the history of some of the stories I've been watching and following. A lot of this week's report is going to deal with financial stuff because that has been a very prime focus for me for the last little while, and I'm going to lay some of the groundwork for the financial report that I'm going to do after this. So, one of the biggest stories in the news, of course, in the last couple of weeks was the U.S. power shift because the Republicans have taken control of the Senate. I love that the fact that as soon as CNN ran with that story at the exact same time, Ron Paul was being reported on RT as saying the U.S. elections are a one-party monopoly. Because, let's face it, it's all the same thing. For those of you who are going to end up in a home for the terminally sarcastic, like myself, I published or republished an article last week entitled, "If You Really Think It Matters Which Party Controls the Senate, Answer These Questions." I think you'll find a good giggle in there. Like every other election that has happened recently, like the Scottish independence referendum, all of these things, they weren't even hours into the voting before YouTube and the internet was flooded with videos that was showing everything from voter ID tampering to gross fraud. Even Reuters ran with an article before the ballots had even been finished saying that they had ID problems cropping up in the US elections. They call it irregularities, which is quite humorous. If you scan through the article, though, and as usual, I'm going to post all the links below this. If you scan through the article, there's a couple of interesting little pieces that they drop in there of the kind of irregularities that happened in the voting. So to move on, other news in this news story is the FBI is going towards the federal Supreme Court trying to get them to expand their hacking powers. This one is really, really humorous because, first of all, I always talk about transparency, and a lot of the stuff that we see come out in the news is actually stuff that has already been happening all along. Now it's just being brought forward in a way to make it transparent to the public. So this one is one of those wonderful examples. The FBI wants to be able to hack into your computer because, you know, they don't always already do that. The advisory panel that's talking about this on the legality side of it said they warned that the expansion would threaten the Fourth Amendment's strict limitations on government search and seizures and allow the FBI to violate the sovereignty of foreign countries. Which they already do regularly, you know, with the NSA, their buddies. So it's just a little piece of transparency. Another one about, you talk about your watchdogs and advisory panels, etc. The world's biggest companies are disclosing too little about the information of what they're doing abroad. So big companies disclose too little on operations abroad. The watchdog on this one, and this is good, says the world's biggest companies disclose little to no financial details about their operations abroad, according to a report by Transparency International, who singled out Chinese companies, but also big tech giants like Amazon and Google, as well as Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, who apparently was ranked as 6th least transparent company in the world. Transparency said the world's biggest oil and gas mining companies are not yet ready for transparency rules that would enter into force across the European Union from July of 2015. So all their report has nothing to do with the oil and mineral companies. This is just talking about mostly technology companies, communication companies, a couple of banks in there. The interesting part of this is those regulations require extractive companies, extractive meaning oils and minerals, to report payments such as taxes to government on a country-by-country and project-by-project basis. In the United States, similar measures are planned, but implementation has been delayed. Again, delayed. So we're going to move on to Canada now, because of course I have a lot of Canadian readers, and being a Canuck myself, I know that I tend to focus an awful lot on the American side of things. So we're going to talk about Canada because there's been a couple of things in Canada that have been pretty big. The first one is right up there with Janet Yellen telling the poor a few months ago that they should build more assets and get rich. This is Canada's head central banker has a modest proposal. You should consider working for free. Tyler at Zero Hedge goes on and says, how bad are things in Canada's job market? The Bank of Canada's governor, Stephen Poloz, says bad enough for young people to consider working for free. Adult children, I love that term, adult children stuck in their parents' basements because they can't find adequate employment should take unpaid work to bolster their resumes as they wait for the recovery to take hold. So all you poor adult children out there in Canada, you're supposed to go out and just, take a job that doesn't pay you anything, because that's going to get you really far while you wait for the recovery. The biggest news in Canada, and this is one that I don't think a lot of people are really clicked into yet, Chinese and Canadian central banks have agreed to a yuan currency trade swap. This is major, major news. This will make the first North American country to be trading directly with China in the yuan currency. Now, back in the summer, there were rumors that Toronto and Vancouver were so pushing for this to happen that they were going to create an offshore company. And apparently the Canadian government, Harper, got a little bent out of shape on that one. So they've just announced it, that yes, Canada and China are now going to skip the greenback entirely. No more Federal Reserve notes for them. They are going to trade back and forth directly between the yuan and the Canadian currency. This is a major piece of news. Another good one on Canada, here we go. And this comes back into the whole transparency, because they really do need to let the public know these things. Canada police deploy facial recognition tech, which is really, really funny because they've been doing this for years. Years. The only difference is now that the Canadian police are doing it themselves instead of sending all the recordings down to the States to be analyzed. So nothing new here, nothing new to see, just a little bit of transparency as they let it all come out. So we're going to hop across the pond now. England, two major stories out of England that are so glaringly transparent that anyone who reads these has got to just shake their heads. The first one is British Parliament to debate money creation for the first time in 170 years. And I'm going to read you a couple of quotes from the article because some of the things that are said are just so beautifully transparent. The New Economics Foundation decided to release this, said most MPs lack a sufficient understanding of money creation, leaving them ill-equipped to legislate on important policy. The New Economics Foundation senior economist James Meadway said the last time the issue of money creation was debated in Parliament in Britain was in 1844. And apparently that didn't work out so well. Here we go. In 1844, where politicians stopped banks issuing their own currencies, leading to an economic crash 3 years later. The crash of 2008 drummed home the important point that we cannot just leave the institutions that look after our money to their own devices. I can't imagine why not. How banks operate, how money is created and supplied by them are so central to the economy, but so dysfunctional, that widening public debate and discussion on the money system has to be a good thing. That said, the last time Parliament debated money creation, it managed to come to an entirely the wrong answer. Following conventional economic theory at the time, Robert Peel's Bank Charter Act in 1844 stopped the banks from issuing their own currency, which basically allowed the entire system to completely crash. So, British Parliament, because apparently they all have not a freaking clue where money comes from, is going to debate that very issue. Now the interesting part is, will it be made public? Because if there's a live feed, I'd like to watch that debate, if for nothing else than the comical aspect of it. Again in England, and this is another one that is huge, the First World War, 100 years later, the UK bonds that financed the First World War are to be redeemed 100 years later. Now, the title is a little curious, and most people are going to just skip over this. The interesting part to this is the UK government is to repay part of the nation's First World War debt. 100 years later, they're finally going to make a payment. Not all of it, just a payment. Now, if you think that's bad, 100 years later, they're going to make their first payment on the First World War debt. What you have to do is read later on in the article when it says, as Europe marks the centenary of the Great War, Treasury said it would pay off £218 million sterling from a 4% consolidated loan next February as part of a redemption of bonds stretching far back as the 18th century. In addition to the war bonds, and of course this is much farther down in the article, in addition to the war bonds, some of the debt being repaid dates as far back as the 18th century. In 1853, William Gladstone, then Chancellor, consolidated the capital stock of the South Sea Company, which had collapsed in the infamous South Sea Bubble financial crisis of 1720. And in 1888, then Chancellor George Groshan converted the bonds first issued in 1752, which were then converted again during the Napoleonic War, and then converted again for the Crimean War, and then the Slavery Abolition Act, and the Irish Distress Loan. So basically, they took out a bond, put no end date on it, and every time they needed more, and never made payment on it, not even once. As far back as 1720, they just keep rolling the debt into a new bond, into a new debt. And now, for the first time in 100 years since the last time the bond was rolled, they're going to make a payment of £218 million sterling. Now I'm going to go out on a limb here that if they're talking about a 4% consolidated loan, that 218 million isn't even going to cover 1% of the interest rate that has to have been on this loan. But isn't it interesting how governments can get away with that kind of stuff? I'd like to just not make a payment on my credit card for the next 100 years. I don't see why I can't do it. Moving on. Pardon me, as I play with my computer here. Oh, this was funny. Really, really funny. Headline news. $3.8 billion in UK aid for developing states was routed through tax havens. The article goes in to talk about 2/3 of investments by the private sector wing of the UK's foreign aid program were funneled through tax havens in 2013. The network comprised of 48 NGOs from 18 different EU states that campaign on development, tax justice, and other financial issues. The research reveals how billions of euros supposedly intended for projects in developing states are being channeled through tax havens that are shrouded in secrecy. Now, the best part of this article, if you click on the link, they show you a beautiful picture of a tropical beach, and it's the Cayman Islands. Now, if you've been an RTS reader, you might remember that I reported on the fact that the Premier, McKeeva Bush, I love the fact all these politicians, last name Bush. Anyways, Cayman Islands Premier McKeeva Bush was arrested in 2012 for fraud and money laundering in the Cayman Islands. And yet, this is where all these aid for developing states is being pushed through. I just thought that was kind of humorous. Moving on to Europe. Big news, a week and a half ago, there were 51 politicians and former politicians arrested across Spain in a massive anti-corruption crackdown. And some of the charges are quite humorous, and it comes back to hidden Swiss bank accounts and all kinds of fun, interesting stuff. In the EU, we've got 3 articles in a row here that are very, very funny. You have, first of all, the central bankers challenge Draghi on the ECB leadership style because they don't like that he's just a loose cannon and he keeps telling all their secrets in public. That's what it boils down to. So the ECB has also put together a new watchdog. Yes, another new watchdog. To overlook the EU bank's supervision. Now, if this isn't a case of putting the cat in charge of the catnip, I don't know what is, because it really is hysterical when you think of how these guys set up these watchdog, impartial organizations to, keep them out of trouble. Of course, the fact that they're in trouble to begin with, you may have one of these ones here, 9 billion euros wasted. The EU falls down on a budget audit after misspending errors to the tune of 9 billion euros. Which, when I read it, I laughed because the first thing that came to mind was the scene in the movie Independence Day when Julia says to the president, "You don't actually think they spent $20,000 on a hammer, $30,000 on a toilet seat, do you?" Maybe they should look at the numbers again. Now, I'm going to get into now a lot more of the heavy financial stuff. It's where I've really, really been digging deep for the last couple of weeks. But this story has to be talked about first. This takes us to a whole new realm of complete ridiculous stupidity when we look at economy and financial shenanigans. This article from last week, so it begins. German bank is charging negative interest to its retail customers. Basically, what that amounts to is if you put $500,000 into a bank account charging you negative interest, it means you're now paying to have your money in that bank. You're not making any money, you're actually paying them negative interest rates. I would really like if an economist could come forward and explain that one to us, because there's just nothing in that statement that makes any sense whatsoever. So when we finish this news, I'm going to record now a second video that will deal with totally the financial situation, the new financial system, etc. But this is a little precursor to that. We're going to look at gold and assets now in the news. If you have been watching this in any way, shape, or form over the last, especially 6 months. In the last month, though, we have now reached epic proportions of blatant commodities rigging and fraud. It really has gone beyond the realms of what anything can, no one with any rational ability at thought can read the articles that are in mainstream media about the economy, especially looking at the commodities such as gold, silver, and oil, and be able to explain how these are not completely being rigged. We've got several articles that are just beyond ridiculous here. This one, Tyler at Zero Hedge, pulls up some fantastic, thanks Fly, some fantastic graphs showing the prices of gold dumping. This article here, because nothing says best execution like dumping $1.5 billion in gold futures at 12:30 in the morning. For the 5th day in a row, someone decided that 12:30, past midnight, would be an appropriate time to be dumping large amounts of precious metals positions via the futures market. Tonight, with over 13,000 contracts being flushed through gold amounting to over $1.5 billion, gold prices tumbled $20 to $11.51, its lowest since April of 2010. Silver is through to 16 and back at February 2010 lows. And the US dollar is surging. The timing of the dump is right as the Japanese trading floor breaks for lunch. I don't believe in coincidence, ever, especially when it comes to gold. Now here's the thing. We have massive movement in gold. Massive movement. Now, when you talk in commodities, they always talk about people buying and selling, raising and lowering the price. What a lot of people don't realize is that if someone's selling, that means that someone else is buying. So, who's doing the buying is got to be what you need to be looking at. In Reuters last week, and this was amazing that Reuters was actually this transparent with this. Gold prices swoon, coin sales surge as buyers seek bargains. A sharp break in gold prices to their lowest levels in more than 4 years has unleashed a surge in demand for coins, with buyers in Germany queuing up out the door and some US investors returning to the market for the first time in years. Coin dealers and mints from North America to Europe are reporting a surge in coin and small bars that are favored by the retail investor. After the gold spot on Friday broke below the key technical support of $11.80 an ounce, $1,180 an ounce, pardon me, it was the biggest buying binge since April of 2013. This is a piece of transparency because of one major point of this, that as the price of gold is falling, those who actually are following this, they're not going out and buying gold futures, and they're not going out and buying gold certificates. They're buying coins and bars, physical gold. And the reason why is anyone, again, with half a brain cell watching this, watching these markets, knows that the entire commodities paper market is built on fraud. The only way you can make anything that is remotely solid is in the holding of the actual coins themselves. Not that I agree with the purchasing of gold, but it's a very telling thing. At this moment, apparently you can't buy a silver eagle in the States to save your life. The mint can't stamp them out fast enough. And that should make people very, very leery about what's going on. Now, I'm going to go up here for a quick second. I'm going to backtrack here because there's a couple of things that we want to talk about with gold and currency. We all know, I've been talking about it for a long time, that the big push for the new financial system is going to Basel III compliance, which is fully asset-backed finances. The currencies have to be backed by a physical asset. Now, it started off, it was supposed to be gold, but it also includes precious metals, oil, even natural resources such as, I believe, lumber and fresh water are now being considered assets. But when you look at the corruption in the gold market, silver, precious metals, and oil, you got to question how you can base a currency on a commodity that is completely rigged. Except, of course, the currencies themselves are also completely rigged. So it's kind of like rigging a rigged game. There's just no winner. At least none of us people are the winners. Now, I want to go up here because this is very, very interesting. There were big meetings in China this week. And there was an article that I think everyone should go have a look at. The new currency wars cometh. Gold is to be the last man standing. And one of the most important points in this article is the fact that the author writes that China now has enough gold bullion, physical possession of gold, not paper, physical possession of gold, to be a fully asset-backed currency and to take over as the world's reserve currency. And what's that? China has made deals with, I believe it's now 9 separate, officially deals with 9 separate countries to trade between countries in the yuan with no, not even a momentary touching of US Federal Reserve dollars. Funny thing, apparently last week, the Council of Foreign Relations, it was an interview with former Fed head Alan Greenspan, and there was a glitch. There was a glitch in their transcription of the Greenspan interview, and it was really, really, really funny because of what the glitch piece missing said. From the official transcript of Alan Greenspan's interview last week with the Council of Foreign Relations, we all know what those guys are about, where he dared to utter his honest opinion that gold is a currency, it is still, by all evidence, a premier currency. No fiat currency, including the dollar, can match it. And that was apparently where they had a glitch in the live feed, and that one couple of sentences just didn't seem to get out there. But they've remedied that. Now you can actually get the entire transcription. But when you have Alan Greenspan saying something like that in that big of a meeting, you have to take note. Now, I'm going to just dive into here. This next article dives into, again, we're talking gold and silver and currency. We're going to venture a little into the realms that some of you listening to this news story are not going to like, but tough luck, you're going to have to listen anyway. A lot of people thought when the US invaded the Gulf regions, when the US invaded Libya, that it was all for the oil and, you know, to set up democracy. When of course those were just byproducts of their master plan. Master plan being to take over the central banks of those countries. And my next statement is in no way to be taken as a glorifying of this man in any way, shape, or form. But after leaving him in power for decades, when the US went in and went after Gaddafi and had him executed, there was a lot more to that than what the vast majority of the general public understands. One of the biggest things that Gaddafi was doing at that moment was setting up a gold-backed, fully asset-backed currency that was to be used across the Middle East. And all of a sudden, that's when the US decided to go in and have him executed. Now, I'm giving you that as the little precursor to this next story. This came out just yesterday. ISIS, as in the Islamic State, wants to introduce its own currency. Plans to bring back solid gold and silver dinar coins was announced in Iraqi mosques. And this is mainstream media. This is not alternative, mainstream media. In the article it says that this new currency could be out in a matter of a couple of weeks. Now, in order to, it's not even like printing money, in order to stamp gold and silver coins, to mint those coins, there would need to be a minimum of a year's preparation to get this online and ready to run. When was it when all of a sudden we heard about ISIS in the news? About a year ago? All of a sudden it just appeared. Oh, ISIS, the terrorists, we've got to go after them. So, is it about terror? Or is it about another Middle Eastern country group going to a gold-backed, fully gold-backed asset currency that would completely wipe out the US fiat dollar? Therein is the question that everyone needs to look at. Following this, I went through and went all the way through. We've spent the last week looking at, I fell down a rabbit hole, again, I hate when that happens, the big banks, and spent days poring over articles about the fines and settlements and lawsuits and penalties that the big banks are and have been paying over the last couple of years. Now, down below this, I'm going to give you a shitload of links that you can look at. I am not even going to try and run through these, because the one thing I discovered when I sat down with my mathematician husband was basically, I don't think there's any way of actually calculating exactly how much has been paid out and is due to be paid out in all the lawsuits, the fines, the settlements, and the penalties. I know that for 2014 alone, just using the mainstream media articles, I think I gave up counting when the total reached about $115 billion that the big banks, and by big banks I'm talking about the major ones, your Barclays, your Bank of America, your Deutsche, Wells Fargo. $115 billion, and that was only what I could gather up through the mainstream media reports for 2014 alone. all of the banks, the major ones, have added billions of dollars to their lawsuit war chests. And it's actually called this in the mainstream media, their war chest. This is money they've put aside just to cover legal costs that they know are coming. This isn't even to pay the legal costs they've already dealt with. This is future money. UBS put aside $3.5 billion this year just for their legal costs. LIBOR, Forex rigging, commodities rigging, the mortgage frauds, money laundering, Ponzi schemes are only a few. And on Removing the Shackles and Transpicuous News, I've actually published a couple of little articles and republished a couple of articles that kind of dig into some of this for those of you who want to do some more homework. It is astronomical. The biggest thing on all of it, though, was when I questioned, well, I wonder if they have to pay, is this a tax write-off? And sure enough, I went and did a search. And all these legal costs are a tax write-off for these big banks. So you've got banks like Bank of America, who got cash on hand bailout of $46 billion in the financial crash of 2008. And their legal fees, I believe, are a little over $2 billion at this point, if I remember my math correctly. So they got $46 billion. And they've just had to pay $2 billion, give or take, in legal fees and settlements and fines. And that's tax deductible. Do you really think these banks are being punished, are being held accountable? Or is this just a dog and pony circus for the public? My personal opinion is, welcome to the circus. None of it actually matters. Especially when you try and figure out where all this money that they're being fined and sued over is going. Try and find out. All this money for Forex, rigging, LIBOR, where did the money go? The billions of dollars that were fined, was it just put back into another bank? Good question. Anyway, down below I have a whole pile of homework for everyone. If you should feel the need to go down the rabbit hole a little further, I've got a list of articles here that I think most of you will find very, very interesting when we're looking at the scope, especially of the financial ridiculousness and the utter bullshit that is the current global economy. But that is the end of today's show. I am going to pause for a moment, and then I will get ready to do the financial update, which I will record later on today and hopefully get out within a short time of this video going out. We are making an effort to work on the technical issues. As you can see, no fancy green screen behind me this time. I decided it was better to just get the show done and worry about the technical stuff for next week's show, but we're working on it. Anyways, good night everyone. I hope you all have a great time, and I will see you again very soon on Transpicuous News.
Broadcasting a new paradigm on the One Network.